Yeah, that's fine.
But video is not something that we have an incredible plan for, but it's something that we will hope to use eventually. But it's kind of in the works. But main audio one. But yeah, was there anything you want to cover, Charlie, or yourself, Claudia? Just anything to run through before we crack on?
No, I don't think so. All good.
Oh, yeah. Nice. Did it look good in terms of like what I sent over? Is that all cool as well?
Yeah, I made a couple of notes and stuff, but I'll probably just swing it mostly.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
So we like it. So yeah, just get my docs.
I'm glad we're all so prepared for this.
The best way. I mean, we were already picking on some topics last time, weren't we? I just need to like slow myself down when I go to podcast mode. So that's my main concern. It's like rather than speed 100 miles an hour, it's like just chill, mate. It's good.
I know. I always do.
Don't worry about that too much, though. Like, it's just natural chat, isn't it? Like, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
And can always slow you down in the edit. Worst comes to absolute.
Slow me down the edit, God. 0.75 speed.
Magic, mate. Don't worry about it. Audio magic.
What a day. Nice. So Ryan, this is actually our first guest getting on, isn't it? So how do you want to do the introduction? Yourself, myself? What's the thinking behind it?
Yeah, I realized looking at that, we didn't actually like assign who's going to say that first bit. I think
ignore me, carry on.
Yeah, I think if you go topic and guest, then I'll do that. If you do from there to there, then I'll kick that bit off.
Yep, I think I know what you mean. If I do from here to here, you do from there to there. Yep.
Looking at different dots, mate.
Oh, what a day! What a day!
I swear there's literally
two
dots in that folder. No, I mean maybe.
Yeah, no, it's all good. It's all good. There are 2 docs, but yeah, it's fine. We'll start on that one. But yeah, I think just in terms of like topic wise, yeah, personal brand, we're all spot on that, aren't we? So that should be good. But yeah, I'll just do a topic introduction, and then I'll bring you in, give you that introduction, and then hand over to yourself to say hi, Claudia, and then over to Ryan to do some questions on your story, starting with your journey, I think, and then move down from there.
Sounds good.
Okay, no problem. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the House Stack podcast. On today's show, we've got Claudia Cardinali joining us, and she's going to be talking about how you can build a personal brand and how it can land you a job. So Claudia is a storyteller at Great Influence, where she helps to build some of the UK's biggest CEOs and founders into industry-leading influential figures on LinkedIn. Having built a personal brand over 8,000 followers on her own LinkedIn in the last 12 months, she's now on a mission to change the way we learn and to help people find the careers they genuinely love. So welcome to the show, Claudia.
Thanks so much for having me on, guys. Pleasure to be here.
Amazing. So excited for the chat. And of course, as ever, as in the title, you can find Claudia on LinkedIn, and we will put the link in the description. But I guess first of all, Claudia, really, we want to dive into yourself and your story. So first off, just how did you find your way to working at Great Influence? What's your journey up till now?
Yeah, so it's been a bit of a whirlwind, to be honest. I graduated uni nearly 4 years ago now, which feels like an absolute lifetime, but also yesterday at the same time. So I studied international relations. I kind of thought actually that I wanted to work in like politics or policy or something. Anything that really like impacted public opinion, I guess. And I actually found myself working in a marketing agency. I kind of don't want to say fluked my way there, but basically I had a 1-month contract answering a hotline, and then ended up being trained up as an account executive, working on the Budweiser account, which was really cool. So that's kind of how I found myself in marketing. I worked there for about a year, and I was just kind of getting a little bit stuck on being bottom of the ladder, basically. It wasn't really where I wanted to be, and I wanted to move a bit quicker. So I ended up leaving. I went traveling for a little while, and then when I came home, I actually ended up working in a bar for nearly about 9 months. I needed a job that like to be at home for a while, and I needed something a little bit flexible. So that's just kind of what I ended up in. And that was like a real bring me back down to earth job, I guess, because obviously when I left uni, I was thinking the world was going to fall at my feet. I could get any job that I wanted, and that was just slightly not the case. So that gave me a little bit of time to actually think as well and figure out where I really wanted to go. It wasn't where I wanted to be at the time, but I actually did end up loving that job. And then I ended up working for a private healthcare company as a digital marketing intern for 3 months, where I interviewed doctors and surgeons and like neurosurgeons. And it was another people facing job where I had to kind of get the best out of people. And I think that's where I started like work with people, I guess, in a more kind of client facing role. So yeah, that was like my journey back into marketing. And then I started working for the grad soc, which was where I think my passion for helping students arose, which was also a small business. So there was only 2 of us when we first started, and then it grew as I was working there for about a year. So it was a mix of like marketing, helping people, working for a small business. And then because of the work I was doing there and building my own personal brand at the time, Ash, who is the founder of Great Influence, saw what I was posting on LinkedIn and reached out to me, and here I am now.
And here we
Awesome.
are.
Awesome. And then with that kind of that journey, I know you did international relations, say at Leeds at university. Did you know that marketing was the path and that's something you really enjoyed? I know you came back to it, but was that because you had that spark initially, or was that because that was always the ambition, the passion, the dream?
I don't think I really knew. When I said that I vaguely wanted to work in marketing when I was at uni, but to be honest, I don't think I really knew what that meant at the time. I just thought it was like a cool job that semi-creative people did. So I was like, yeah, I'll take a stab at that. I didn't know what within that I wanted to do, or what field or what job. I was just like, yeah, I want to work in marketing. So no, I guess I didn't really know, but I knew that I wanted to make an impact on people's opinion. And what I originally thought, I guess my thinking behind it was that the only way to do that would be in policy. But in actual fact, people don't really listen to governments, as we've seen, and people listen to brands way more, and they're actually more like brands can be way more influential and change people's minds about stuff. So I think that's what initially drew me to it. And I wanted to work on like campaigns, I think, originally, whereas now that kind of drive is switch towards more working with people, which is what I do now.
Okay, yeah, no, that's super interesting. And I think something that is tied to your journey quite strongly is this idea that you don't need to know where you're going.
100%.
Right. So what I would start off with as well is, having started off at Great Influence, having found your way to something you're passionate about, what is the next, say, let's keep it 2 years maybe instead of 5 or 10, where does the next sort of immediate future lie for you at the moment?
Honestly, I've never really had a plan, as you can probably tell from my experience. But I think I definitely think I'll stay in this industry for a while. Like, I love my job at the moment. I love all the people that I work with. And I think the biggest thing for me right now is that I work with CEOs and founders every day. I literally speak to all of them every day. I learn about their businesses, what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong. And I'm literally there on like every step of the way to some extent, because they have to post about what they're doing, and it's almost like live updates from all these people of all the cool stuff that's happening in their business. And I just think, for what I want to do right now, which is learn as much as I possibly can, really there is no better job, because I'm not stuck in just one industry or one company even. Like, I've got all these different streams of information coming into me every single day. So in a nutshell, I have no idea.
Quite varied. And do you think that variation in what you do in your work, in your role, is part of what drives you, as part of your passion? Or do you think within that it's broader in terms of that impact that you had while at the grad soc on students? I know that's still a big part of what you do. Like, how can you combine that into finding your passion and working within it for the next 2 years?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a weird one, because like, I guess what I put out on LinkedIn is very much like educational content, in the sense that I talk about my experience leaving uni and what it's like to try and find a job and all that kind of crazy stuff that happens when you first start in the working world. And I guess that's not actually like, it's almost like parallel lines to what I'm doing at Great Influence, although they are so linked at the same time. But I do think my like real underlying passion lies in just helping people out as much as I can. And I feel very fortunate to be able to do that on LinkedIn myself, through building up an audience there. but also I get the opportunity to do that through all the clients we work with, because they put out so much good content and helpful content, like giving people advice, motivating people. So not only do I get to do that on my own platform, I get to be a part of helping other people do that on their platforms as well, which is something that literally I would never take for granted ever.
Yeah, there's a great focus on impact and on helping people and kind of bringing people up to what they want to achieve. So within that, what would you say your biggest learning has been, or the biggest learning curve maybe, since you started off on this kind of world of work career journey, whatever you want to call it, today?
Oh, that's such a good question. I'm not sure really. I think as content goes, I guess that's like primarily my role is to create content. And I think as content goes, the biggest thing I've learned is the power of an audience. And if you know what you're doing, I think how potentially easy it can be to do that, because I think a lot of people make it sound very, very complicated to build up an audience. And I'm not saying that it's easy, but I think there's a lot of like, I don't know, misinformation about how to speak to people. And I think what it fundamentally comes down to is being honest, talking about things that you're genuinely interested in, and not trying to put on kind of a facade of what you think people should see or read or whatever. And I think if you kind of stick to, and I hate the phrase, but like being authentically yourself, and I used to hear that and think, what the shit does that even mean? Because who the hell else am I going to be? But I think as I've seen it happen with more people, that is genuinely true. And I think if you start to copy other people's content, or if you start to kind of, I don't know, pretend to be this successful CEO that you're not quite there yet, like people will see through it. And unless you're completely transparent, there's no point to actually doing it, because the persona you're creating isn't real. So when people meet you, they're either going to be disappointed, or you're not going to match up to the expectation that they've already got. And in a sense, I actually think that's worse than if you were just not quite there to begin with, because you're already like letting someone down before you've even started, I think.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I guess that's the kind of difficulty on social or on personal branding of letting people in means letting them in, right? It means kind of being transparent and being authentic in that way. But maybe just picking up on what you said there about it being a bit easier than people think, or not as challenging as people might think then. And I sense from what you said there that there's that kind of consistency and discipline times by authenticity. Is that the kind of key tip, key formula, if you like, for personal branding?
Yeah, 100%. And I think consistency is one of the most underrated things ever, and something that I've probably really only learned in the past year or so that I have been posting on LinkedIn. Like all those times I went to the gym as a one-off, weren't cutting it, and now I've learned it's because I wasn't doing it every week even. So I think that really is like so important when you're posting to begin with, on LinkedIn especially, well, any platform really. And it's almost like I read actually in Atomic Habits by James Clear, which is great, basically saying that turning up to wherever is half the battle. So if you can just turn up wherever that is, whether that's creating content or going to the gym or whatever goal you've kind of set yourself, turning up is like the hardest part. So if you can do that consistently on LinkedIn especially, then you're one step, well, not even one step ahead, 10 steps ahead, I would say.
Yeah, no, I love that. So I guess focusing in on that, that's the main topic of today's chat, really, personal branding and potentially as well, particularly how it can land you a job. So starting off, I guess, on the base level for people who are tuning in, they've kind of seen it around as a term. What does personal branding mean to you as a kind of definition?
Good question. I think there's a lot of things up in the air about personal branding at the moment, and I think there is still a stigma attached to it. I think a lot of people think it's just basically someone who blows their own trumpet and like shouts about all their achievements, and that it's a bit cringy, to be completely honest. But I actually think that is changing a little bit more now, as we've seen more companies and more people trying to adopt a personal brand. So really, I think it is building a presence for people to kind of get to know you online, and like doing it with intention as well. Like you're creating an impression for yourself with intention. So rather than like I don't know, just waiting for someone to hear something about you or word of mouth. Like, you have the power really by creating your own personal brand to take back control of people's opinions of you, which I think is like invaluable, really. Like, if you can control what people think about you, I don't know why you wouldn't do it, because people are going to have their opinions anyway, so you might as well steer them in the right direction.
Do you think that there's, because of that control that you have, maybe that's what feeds that kind of stigma or negative connotation maybe around personal branding, is that it's like the sticky side of marketing almost, that kind of makes you think something that's not real?
Yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, you do have control over it. So like we were talking about before, like, you can steer people in the wrong direction if you're so inclined. But again, that isn't reality. So when the day eventually comes when we can be free again and you can meet people in the real world, I think the online presence, really, I've been doing this for a year, and 90% of that time we've been in some kind of lockdown. So if I suddenly run out into the free world and I'm a completely different person to what I've been online, it's just not going to match up, and there's going to be some disappointment somewhere from someone because the expectation that I've created for people isn't real. So I think, yeah, it's just important to, I don't know, stay true to what you actually believe in.
I think it's a really good point as well on effectively being able to shape the narrative and have influence on what people say about you or what people think about you. To those who are perhaps starting out in the personal branding world, sometimes it can feel like putting your voice out there in the first instance is going to bring in more criticism than it will actually bring in its like positive thoughts as well. So how would you think about that as someone starting out, if they were to overcome, say, that feeling of criticism, that feeling of, wow, okay, there's a scary world out there. What if people see my post and they don't like it, or they're afraid, or it doesn't match up to the expertise that I'm trying to portray that I have? Like, how would you advise someone to overcome that fear?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I mean, we work with clients who have sold their businesses for multi-million pounds. We work for investors, we work for owners of agencies, and all these kind of people that have been working and building businesses for years. And some of them still get like apprehensive about posting on LinkedIn. So I think firstly, realizing that pretty much everyone feels the same way. Like, it is scary to put yourself out there online for literally people to judge you. Like, that's effectively what you're doing. So I think realizing that everyone's in the same boat is the first step, really. And secondly, I think as long as what you're posting, like, definitely this worked for me when I first started posting, was my intention wasn't to really get likes, or even at the beginning, it wasn't even really to build an audience. It was to share things with people in the hope that what I'd been through would help them as well. And I think by changing the kind of intention that I had with it, it made it a lot easier for me to be able to put things out there without thinking, oh shit, there's only going to be 2 people that like this, probably one being my mom. So with taking that pressure off myself really helped. And I think as long as you're not chasing, like, if I've done it before, when I've posted something that's done well on LinkedIn, I try and follow up with a different post after, and I get more nervous about posting because I'm like, shit, I've set this standard of, I have to get X amount of likes. How am I going to beat that? How am I going to hit that? And I actually did it last week, and I didn't post for the whole week because I was like, oh, it's not going to do as well as the last post. So it still happens, like, and it's fine that it does, but I think it's important to just kind of get back on the horse in some respect and know that the long term, what you're working towards, is more important than the kind of jittery feelings that you might have putting yourself out there. And don't get me wrong, it is hard and it is difficult, but understanding really the reason why you're posting is really important.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. I think perhaps some people might bring the critique of, like, it's also within your job role, so it makes sense for you to post a lot more. Say if they're applying for a corporate role at a big company, then there's almost that feeling of like, should I post because they're going to check my LinkedIn? They're going to scan everything I'm doing online, and they're going to perceive a judgment of me from it. So how, like, this is almost taking the next level of that fear, is applying it to getting a job on both the positive and negative sense. It definitely opens opportunities, personal branding does, but can it also close opportunities by having people perceive you in a negative light?
I think it really depends on what industry you're working in. Like marketing, I would say building a personal brand is absolutely nothing but positives. But I've also got a friend who works in finance in London, and she was wanting to start building her personal brand, and she was just like, obviously a bit worried about what would happen because she's kind of, I don't know, a young woman in finance, and she wants to start building her personal brand, make it a bit of a splash in the industry, and she's going to be up against, you know, the older corporate people who might not understand the value, which I completely get, and it's much harder to be in that position. Whereas I'm very lucky in that I work for a company that really supports it, and I feel a bit more confident doing it. Whereas I think if you have got the battle of additional pressure of shit, what my work going to say about me, I completely get that. But I think it's in a sense trying to help them understand the value that a personal brand can bring. And I think fundamentally any business is people working with people. So I can't really see a perspective where a personal brand wouldn't be a good thing. I think if you are in that battle, helping whoever's in charge understand the value of what you're trying to say and also the potential that it could bring in the future, like personal branding essentially is great to help bring in business opportunities. So even just having a conversation to educate them, and if you maybe even have like some kind of posting plan and work together on it. So I think a really important thing is like being open with communication. Like if you're doing it on the sly and trying to get these low-key posts in there slagging off finance and you work in finance, it's probably not going to go down that well.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, how it differs by industry and by who you're with as well. And that relationship you have with your employer or with your manager is perhaps the most important thing as well, being open with them. So with that in mind, from the business's perspective, should all businesses, because people orientation is really important within business, like you just said there, should they all invest in personal brands? And if they do, how can they realize the returns on their time or money they spent doing it?
I mean, I might be slightly biased, but yes, they should. I think, in fact, we were just on a call earlier with Carrie Rose, who's the CEO of Rise at 7. And if you look through their LinkedIn, if you look through their Twitter, all of the people that work there are posting about the cool stuff that the company's doing. Like they're building their company on the personal brands of their employees, which I think is a very forward-thinking strategy. And I think we'll start to see more of that, especially in marketing agencies, as people realize the value. But I think relying on the personal brands of employees is going to become even more important. I think there is kind of pressure on companies to start doing it more. I think there also is a potential for it to go wrong as well, as long as if it's like too forced, or you know, you're telling your employees to post on LinkedIn, it's not natural. Like you should be inspiring them to post rather than kind of forcing them to post, if that makes sense. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, I think you did. I think that probably speaks from a top-down approach rather than a bottom-up. So joining an organization that promotes it within the leadership team rather than within those young people who first join in the first place. So do you think that leans a bit more into the companies that are likely to adopt it being or having young founders and people who are open to this? And if not, or where there are older founders and older companies, how can they switch and really get into the game of personal branding to benefit both the business and themselves? Does it take like a whole action plan, like that is on message, on brand, or is it as simple as just post consistently 3 times a week and put content out that's relevant to your business and you'll see results?
Yeah, it's funny actually, we've been having that conversation this week. I think you can be too branded. I think if you're everywhere all the time talking about work, people won't see it as authentic, and they won't see it as really something that, like, essentially a personal brand is people want to find out about you. And if you're constantly posting about work, it's almost like you might as well post it from your company page then, if that's all you're going to talk about. I think having a mix of the two, where you talk about work in some instances, but you also talk about yourself within that context, just makes it a little bit more genuine. Like obviously if you're posting about work on your LinkedIn, you're going to be invested in your job and want to see the company do well, but at the same time people want to get to know you more as well, and by doing that you're like indirectly still promoting the company, because you know people coming onto your page or whatever, so it's drawing people in to be a little bit more invested.
And I think as well, just one more point on that. As the company, how much control should they have over the personal brands? Should they clarify the branding message, the business message, when there is a post that's relevant? Or should they give the people the free rein to discuss it in their own light, their own words, and their own interpretations?
Yeah, really good question. I think ultimately you have to trust your employees to do right by you. I think if you're trying to too concisely control it again, it looks forced. Like if you're sending around a company-wide email saying post X, Y, and Z, and everyone posts carbon copies of the same thing, it's immediately, you can tell exactly what's going on and it doesn't look real. That being said, of course, there is the potential that someone can post something absolutely horrendous and it could backfire. But you just have to hope that you haven't hired someone who's going to trash talk your
business. Yeah. On a slightly different point then, personal branding to me is really associated with social and the different channels they're in, and think about how you come across an email or kind of virtual environments as well. And obviously that's linked with COVID. But how does personal branding translate to businesses or people, leaders who are not reliant on social for the businesses that they do? Or, you know, you're a teacher, or you're somebody that doesn't necessarily translate in a classic sort of head of marketing agency kind of way. What's their interpretation? What's their use of personal brand? Is it relevant for them?
I think it's less relevant. I think obviously if your aim is to try and get on podcasts, increase the awareness that people have your business, and you're a marketing agency, it kind of comes naturally that you would be on social. If you are a teacher and you're looking to create, two of my housemates are teachers actually, so I'll give them this pep talk after. But if you are looking to try and increase your personal brand, I think it's still beneficial, because even the experiences that you have by networking and speaking to different people might not directly impact your career immediately, but I think creating more opportunities for yourself wherever they might come along is never a bad thing, and doesn't have to be as intense. Like I spend a lot of time on social anyway because that's my job. Like I spend all hours of the day on LinkedIn because that's my job. If you're a teacher, you're probably not going to want to spend 5 hours on LinkedIn in the evening when you get home from school. So I think it does really depend, but I think for any profession really there's no downside to it, because the purpose is to increase opportunities. It doesn't necessarily have to be business opportunities. It can be opportunities for yourself, whether that is just networking, increasing the amount of people that you know in the hope that something might come along in the future. I actually think that's another point to note, is that almost you're kind of building your personal brand for your future self to some extent. Like if someone had told me a year ago that I would be sitting here now, even on a podcast or on Clubhouse earlier in a room full of 200 people, there's absolutely no way in hell I would have believed you. But because of the consistent effort that I put in over that time, and we see it for clients. We've literally got a graph of one of our clients, Chris, who was posting for 2 years consistently with roughly the same engagement. And then all of a sudden there's this tipping point where his views just absolutely skyrocket, and he reached 3 million people in a week last week, which is just absolutely mental. Yeah. And a year ago, I reached 3 million people in a year. So I think it is just that consistency and sticking with it over time, perhaps not knowing when that tipping point is going to be, but all the more reason to stick with it.
So thinking maybe that the intention that you mentioned at the outset of what personal branding is to kind of keep knocking at the door, just to put stuff out there, to publish, to speak, to talk your truth, if you like, just to see what opportunities can happen, who you can meet, what might come up. Is that the broad philosophy, would you say, of kind of putting yourself out there, creating to a point where things start to come to you?
Yeah, exactly that. That's such a good way to put it. And I think maybe that is the hardest part of selling personal branding to companies who might not know that much about it, is that you can't say here's going to be the return on investment, X, Y, and Z is definitely going to happen, because you can't really promise that. And we can't even promise that to clients. We don't know X, Y, and Z is going to happen. All we can do is put you in the best physical position that we can for those opportunities to come to you. And I think by not guaranteeing that, it's almost like you work harder to some extent, because you can't guarantee a result. So you're constantly widening your opportunities as much as possible.
Nice. I think you spoke about it a bit earlier, but the point of widening opportunities and bringing in more opportunities on both a personal and a business level, how do you balance that as an employee? Like, how do you decide which ones go business and which ones go personal, especially say with opportunities that are a bit more blurred, should we say, in that something could be, oh, do you want to come and deliver a presentation on a subject of your choice? Initially, you could go, okay, this is the personal brand, or it could be, okay, this is where I represent my business. So how do you know which one to lean into when the opportunities arise?
Yeah, that's, again, a really good question. I think your personal brand is personal first and foremost. So ultimately, you'll be the first person to benefit from anything. But that being said, even me appearing on this podcast now, I'm appearing as Claudia, but then people, well, possibly people will go away and look at me on LinkedIn and they'll see my affiliation with Great Influence. And I think that's where the kind of double-edged sword comes in, is that you appear as you, obviously, when people speak to you, but then every affinity that you have with other companies that you've worked with also comes up in that conversation. And I think that's what makes it so impactful, again, is because you're acting for yourself, so opportunities come to you. But the knock-on effect of that is that you have the power to then influence your business as well.
And do you think by extension, you also, as an employee, have more leverage over a business that you're working for because you have your own audience that you can take?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, no question about it. And I think I'm sure we'll talk about this more later, but I think as personal branding grows and people start to understand the power of audiences even more than they already do coming from a personal perspective, I think we've kind of nailed it for companies building their own audience and kind of like a core fan base, I guess. But I think as companies start to clock onto personal branding more, they'll realize that their employees are actually a huge, huge asset, and employee advocacy will become kind of a similar thing to influencers at the moment. Like, I think as people start to build their own individual audiences and companies start to see how much of an asset that is, the power that those employees will have will be tenfold, because any job they go to, they'll bring their audience with them.
Yeah, I guess it kind of already has existed in a sales role, where if you're an account manager, you have that relationship with your clients. But in this instance, it's for everyone, not just the sales manager, to then take an audience rather than a client base into a new role. Do you think that might come under a job application in the future? Is like, hey, I have a 10,000 strong audience that's engaged. That could really add to your brand, i.e. I can stand out against the other candidates on this list.
Yeah, 100%. If I had a CV, that would be the first thing that I put on it. I think if any employer, well, if I was an employer, which, you know, I'm not, but if I was, and I had two candidates standing in front of me with exactly the same qualifications, and one of them had an audience of 20,000, not a hesitation in my mind which one I'd pick.
Okay, so it's almost like experience, skills, education, audience size. It's almost like a new criteria to be thinking about, isn't it, as well?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that will only increase in importance.
That's interesting. I've never heard that kind of gone through to that level before, but I think that's always been my perspective of anything personal brand related, is to try and be a differentiation factor for potential future employment, or for people just to see something that I do that's a little bit different. But I want to unpick the potential challenge around building a personal brand around what I think is kind of put down to privilege and time. I think of, you know, I've got two jobs. I'm a student as well. I want to get a graduate job and set myself up, but I'm so busy. I've got 80 hours a week. Or even if you're not at uni at that level, you're running three jobs, you've got kids, you're super busy, whatever reason, right? I sense that the only barrier to entry on personal brand is time, which for a lot of people is very inexpensive, but at the same time, ironically, not a lot of people have a lot of time because they're too busy getting by or whatever it is. So how can you develop your personal brand and get some of those benefits when knocking on the door and you don't know what's on the other side. You don't know what the ROI might be.
Yeah.
The measurement's challenging. Kind of, how do you balance that?
Yeah, so like there's no real guarantee of the time you're putting in, really, is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, well, there is no guarantee. So you, in theory, you could do all this stuff and nothing could come of it. Like that is a possibility, of course. But I think it depends what your priorities are. Like if your priorities are the things you've got going on now, and you know you haven't got time to think about the future, there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But I think if you're willing to put in that extra time, the opportunities and the possibilities that could exist in a year are absolutely worth every single shred of effort that you put in. Like there's no denying that sometimes it is hard work, or you're lacking inspo, you don't know what to talk about, and you just think, I really can't be bothered anymore. I'm sure it's happened to people before. It's definitely happened to me. But what brings me back every single time is that all these little opportunities that have happened along the way, it's not, and I think that's the hardest part to realize. It's like your personal brand doesn't suddenly exist over time. Like it is work. It is something that you constantly have to think about. If you're running a business of 150 people, probably the last thing on your mind is going to be, what the hell am I going to post on LinkedIn tomorrow? But the people that do make that extra effort and do sit down for those extra 10 minutes, when the time comes, they'll be the ones that get all the benefits, because they've put themselves in a much better position too. And it's not easy, and it's not for everyone. I completely get that. But the people that are really committed will, there's not a single doubt they will see the benefits of it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think if you're now a student listening and your head nodding, thinking, this is great, big opportunity here, I think I can make the most of it. How would you recommend that they start and then use that to either find opportunities that are relevant or to get them the dream job they're after?
I think firstly, and we do this with all of our clients, we have kind of like a soul searching sesh with them where they kind of unpack all the things that they think they want to post about, figure out why they want to talk about them, talk about their values, what they champion, what they want to call out, all these things. And it is like a real big identity session with them. We call it identity session. So it is really like getting into their mind and under their skin, and exactly why they're thinking what they're thinking and what they want the world to know about them, I guess. And I think that's the first place that everyone should start, is take some time to be a little bit introspective, figure out what you like, what you don't like, the things you're really interested in. And that doesn't necessarily have to be work. I mean, we talk about mental health, we talk about company culture, we talk about leadership, imposter syndrome, burnout, all those things that all our clients talk about in different senses. Like it's not necessarily work related. So I think that really is the first place to start. And that might come in ebbs and flows as well. You might realize that you have all these values, and then as you start posting, you learn a few more things, and those change. I think that's important to remember as well, is that those things can be flexible. But I think, yeah, the first step is definitely be introspective. And then I think the second step is to kind of pick 3 or 4 of those key themes that you feel really strongly about, and you feel like you could confidently talk about, even in a conversation with someone. So if someone came up to you in the street and said, can you talk about X topic for half an hour, you should be able to do that, because it will make it easier as you're posting. So find a few things that you feel confident talking about. And then, yeah, I think the next step is figuring out your tone on LinkedIn, I guess. And I mean, and some people that is really serious, some people it's a bit more jokey, some people it just has to reflect your personality. And once you've kind of found that balance, your confidence should feel a little bit more like improved, because you know it's something that you feel okay with posting and talking about. I think if you're trying to talk about, if I suddenly started talking about finance strategies, I would fall short straight away, because I know nothing about them. So finding something that you feel confident in yourself talking about is really important. And then I also think don't put too much pressure on yourself early on. It's very easy to see these people that are getting hundreds and thousands of likes and think, shit, why am I not doing that? It fundamentally is just not going to happen on day one. And if it does, you're very lucky. So I think, yeah, just take the pressure off yourself and know that it is going to be a bit of a journey, but that's absolutely fine, and that's exactly how everyone's going to be in the same boat.
One thing I pick up on from that is thinking about not being an expert in your field and that imposter syndrome bit. And at what point do you say to yourself, I want to put myself out there, obviously LinkedIn is a very professional social
But is
network,
it?
if you want to call it that. It's an evolving platform. But ultimately you're putting yourself out there into the ether, right?
Yeah.
But at what point do you then say to yourself, actually, I'm not an expert in this thing, I shouldn't be talking about this? And obviously there's an honesty question there, but yeah, how do you grow that audience or think about growing that audience when, you know, you're not an expert in that field, particularly as a young person?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, everyone has those self-doubts. I have it all the time where I think, do people really need to hear this from me? Like, am I adding anything new here? So it is fine to think like that. But I think what's really important is that everyone has their unique perspective on a certain topic. Like, if you think about it, what everyone posts on LinkedIn is probably based around the key themes of like leadership, businesses, company culture, you know, growth, all that kind of thing. And the reason that everyone's content is different is because you might have the same fundamental facts, but your interpretation of that will be slightly different, and what you've learned from that will be slightly different. And I think focusing on the unique value you can offer people, you don't have to be the world's best expert, but what you have to be able to do is to offer you a unique opinion on it in a different way that people might not have heard before. So I think rather than focusing on, like, I guess, like the facts that you're presenting, focus on the opinion that you can offer that might be slightly different, because that's what people are interested in, really. If they're looking, otherwise they just look at, I don't know, fact pages or whatever. They wouldn't be on LinkedIn, they'd be on Google. So adding your opinion is really important, and that takes the pressure off having to be an expert at everything.
Yeah, no, I really like that perspective, really, of taking the pressure away. And I guess that's the point, right? Everyone starts somewhere when you're thinking about expertise or opinion knowledge or anything like that. To go a bit more detail for a second before we move on to close out the show, thinking about personal branding as a tool and more detail to land you a job or land you a client, particularly focused on LinkedIn, I think, again, other than what we've spoken about on posting and putting yourself out there and connecting with people in your industry and things like this, are there any top tips there to try and land the job, land the client? Like, say you're eyeing up that one person, how do you leverage your personal brand to get that conversation?
Yeah, again, really good question. I think effectively what your little post page does on LinkedIn when people stalk you, as they inevitably will, it gives people a first impression of you before you even got in a room with someone. Like, even if you're sitting in an interview and someone's seen something on your LinkedIn about the football team you support, or I don't know, where you were a year ago, or the fact that you're really interested in learning about 4-day work week, for example, like, all those little things are just conversation starters that immediately give you a relationship and a rapport with someone before you've even started talking. And I think that is what's so invaluable about building a personal brand, is that people have a perception of you. And again, that could be a bad thing if you're not doing it in the right way, but the fact that you can take control of that situation and already elevate yourself ahead of someone else just by posting on LinkedIn, like, I think that is just an invaluable advantage to anyone, because you're creating a relationship with someone that you haven't even met, really. So yeah, it's just very, very helpful, I think, in that situation. And it just shows your potential employer what you're actually interested in. And I think it's all very well to sit in an interview and say, you know, I'm really interested in X, Y, and Z. But if you've got a year's worth of posts to back it up, it just adds another level of trust that they might not have had before.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice summary on almost the trust, the warmness that you can develop by having effectively a landing page, which is your homepage, is that first impression someone has. And I think seeing it that way, seeing it as how you might dress when you go outside, or seeing it as how you might first introduce yourself to someone, or the first conversation start you might use, I think seeing it that way helps people understand how useful it can be and how it's often perceived online as well. So with that all in mind, and that discussion about personal branding there, to you, Claudia, how do you think the future of personal branding looks really within the industry, within the wider business environment as well?
So, as I briefly mentioned before, I think employee advocacy is going to be huge. Well, it's already kind of getting there, but I think in the next year or 18 months, we'll see it massively take off. I always think of Gymshark actually as a really good example, because they kind of have their fleet of influencers who are effectively brand ambassadors and let people know about their products and what's going on with the brand, and everyone knows who they are, that kind of thing. But I do think trust in influencers has swindled dramatically, especially over the past year. And I actually think that will continue as well. I think they'll effectively be replaced by employees that have the kind of link to the brand already. And again, it's like another layer of trust. They've been selected by the company. They're kind of vetted before they even started. And I think employees will essentially start to shift into this influencer role as companies become more and more transparent, which we're seeing with like company vlogs and all the kind of behind the scenes footage of companies now. I think especially in marketing, without some kind of online presence or group community or audience of their own, companies just aren't going to be trusted as much. And I think companies will want to hire people that can bring in their own audiences. If we're actually talking like ground level, what it would look like, I think companies will have content studios within their offices for employees to use themselves, podcast studios, studio setups, because I think that kind of marketing is going to be really the only marketing that people eventually trust. So they'll have like creative studios within their offices and things like that when we do eventually get back to offices, and employees will really be like the creative outlet of the brands.
Yeah,
that's my thoughts.
Nice. The employees become the ambassadors. So rather than having separate brand ambassadors that have a personal brand about themselves that they then sell products through or sell services through, it's instead the employees that are already working there that then represent the brand on the social media space.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I think anyway. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think that is definitely a different perspective that I hadn't really thought about before this call. But given what we've discussed and given the kind of movement we're seeing to trust in people that are doing the job rather than those who are merely speaking about the work from a third party perspective, it's almost getting like under the hood and seeing it from the inside, which I think develops that trust that you're seeing is declining in the industry, and makes it way more the key word here that we've just had throughout this entire call that I think is really, really important. Authentic, being your authentic self by also being the authentic brand and being the authentic employee. Like you're not just milking your audience for the next 20% off deal so you can get a nice little referral code. It's I work here. This is my full-time thing. Like this is what I've invested my 40 hours a week, 50, 60, whatever it is, into this role. So you trust me because I'm within it.
Yeah, exactly. I have a question for you guys actually thinking about it. So obviously I'm like, well, I do spend 40 hours a week thinking about personal branding because it is my job. But where along the scale do you think personal branding is at the moment? So 0 is, no one's really started on this path of employees becoming advocates just yet. And 100 is every single person that works for a company has an audience of 10,000.
That's super interesting. That's super interesting because I think we are probably towards the end or getting towards the end of that spectrum. So we might think that the industry or the market or everything is more progressive than it actually is. But I'd probably go the other way and say it's like 3 or 4.
Interesting.
Like I think if you think of the extent to which personal branding is applied, is effective, is known about, is understood on a natural level, I think it's just limited to marketing and kind of leadership and industry and like C-suite. And I think that's part of what you mentioned about the kind of employer advocacy piece and things like this. But very few companies who are incumbents or who are massive and been around forever or whatever are taking those decisions to involve personal branding in that way. It seems to me that it's still the kind of plucky startups or growing businesses. Like even you think about Great Influence and Ash and Social Chain. Like Social Chain, of course, is still now a massive business, but they're not massive. Like, I don't know. I just feel like we will see greater adoption when people who are leaders of larger businesses start to make those organization-wide changes because they know that they'll die if they don't. Whereas at the moment, I feel like it's still that stage of adoption and maturation where it's like, oh, maybe we'll think, you can do your own thing on your own time if you want, but I'm not going to make a podcast studio in the office. It's too expensive. It's kind of that separation between company and personal, I guess. But I think it's still a hell of a long way to go and grow.
Yeah, I think we're on the right track. We're getting there slowly but surely. But yeah, I think marketing industry is probably at the forefront of that right now. And hopefully we'll see a few more industries follow suit.
What do you think, Charlie?
Yeah, I think pretty similarly to Ryan, to be honest. I think we operate perhaps a little bit in an echo chamber. So seeing a lot of people on LinkedIn, but there's almost quite a few that aren't even on LinkedIn in the first place as well, that aren't engaging on social because they see it as a waste of time rather than as seeing the ROI in terms of the opportunities. So I think marketing's going to be the first one to take it up on a top level as well. And you'll see it first with the startup SMEs that are more innovative. But in terms of on a 0 to 10 or 0 to 100 scale, I think it's still, 3, 4 out of 10. Like we can go a lot further than this. And it's exciting, really. I think it's almost the adoption curve you'll see is the early innovators right now are the ones that are taking it up. And the earlier you get on this train, the easier it is to build the audience. And you see it across the social platforms more generally in terms of building an audience, a personal brand. Say TikTok is just crazy right now. But even on, say, LinkedIn, by getting an audience now, you think 5 years' time, people are going to start thinking, well, it's just normal for everyone to have an audience. So by investing in it early and becoming an early adopter of it, you're setting yourself worlds apart, because the key thing to bear in mind is that audience growth, along with business growth, doesn't just step up margin by margin. It increases exponentially. And as soon as you get, say, 3,000, 5,000, 10,000, when you're at a higher base level of audience, it's not about the next one person. It's about the next 5, 10, 15, 20. Like it grows and compounds a lot faster than you think. So by getting in early, there's a huge opportunity here. And I think we are still in the early days of the adoption.
Yeah, definitely. And actually coming back to Ryan's point earlier about time, I think if you posted once a week on LinkedIn every day for the next year, you'd be in an infinitely better position than someone who hadn't posted at all. And really, that one post will take you 10, 15, 20 minutes to improve your opportunities tenfold. Like that is just a sacrifice you should be making of your time.
Nice. And then to sort of think about how this fits into the bigger picture of the workplace of tomorrow. For yourself, Claudia, how do you see the workplace of the next 5, 10 years in your mind? Are we having a blended approach? Are we meeting friends after work? How does the personal branding fit into the broader picture of what you believe work will become in the next 5 years?
Yeah, I think we'll definitely start to see this kind of hybrid office work from home situation. And I think really, even over the last year, the shift to digital has like heightened the importance of having a personal brand, and even the fact that jobs might not be as stable at the moment, and you don't know where you're going to end up, and things are opening, things are closing, things are moving around. I think building your personal brand is really an added blanket of security, I guess, because whatever happens, say you get made redundant tomorrow, you've still got that audience to carry with you in whatever role you have. So there's almost like that extra like kind of level up to help yourself in the future. And I think, as things hopefully go back to normal, I think personal branding will be on the top of people's agendas. So by starting now, you're just putting yourself ahead of the game.
Ahead of the game. I love it. I think that's a really good summary of all of our chats and thoughts about kind of leveraging personal brand, thinking about how it fits into the workplace, the employee-employer relationship, and all of that good stuff. And so really all that remains is for us to thank you, Claudia, for coming on. I think it's a fantastic chat there. And really for our listeners as well, drop us your thoughts on social. You can find Househack on LinkedIn, and we'll drop Claudia's LinkedIn in the description as well. Let us know what you think about personal branding, the future of personal branding, the importance of it in the workplace, bringing your audience with you, all of those things that we've spoken about today. So yeah, all that remains is to say thanks for an amazing episode.
No, thanks so much. Been an absolute pleasure as always.
Amazing.